Nick Wagner Sr. here for another episode of the Full Potential Live Show. I even have my shirt on tonight with the logo and everything. And we have a fantastic guest tonight. So Kelly Monahan, and Kelly, it is we had this scheduled since I think I saw you at TEDx Hartford. It was November of 2019.
Correct.
I saw your awesome TEDx talk, and I asked you to be on my live show, and you were generous enough to say yes, and we planned it for March of 2020, not knowing obviously that we'd be in the middle of the this COVID-19 coronavirus global pandemic. But it turns out that the research that you recently launched with your full-time job with Accenture is really timely in with everything that's going on, which we will dive into. So I really appreciate you making time and joining us for the live show tonight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm glad that we can be agile ourselves in both our topic and what we're going to be talking about today.
So, and as I mentioned earlier to everyone, so Kelly did actually do a TEDx event here in Hartford, Connecticut last year. And we are going to make sure that we link to Kelly's LinkedIn profile if anyone wants to get in touch with Kelly, so you can see her TEDx, her TEDx talk. And we're also going to link to the research that we're going to talk about tonight as well from the company Accenture that she works for. And I always make sure I let everyone know, Kelly. So we're live streaming this to both YouTube and LinkedIn tonight, and then we'll share the final video on YouTube tomorrow, and then we also turn it into a podcast, which comes out on Apple and Google and Spotify. So if you don't want to watch the video, you're more than welcome to just listen. Maybe when you need a break from work, because no one has a commute right now, right? So maybe during a break from work. So why don't we start with this, Kelly? Why don't you share a little bit about yourself? Who are you, and what do you do for a full-time job? And then we'll dive into a little bit about your career before we check out some of this awesome research you just published.
Sure. Well, thanks, Nick, so much. I appreciate the introduction, and so glad that we got to run into each other at Hartford. It's funny for me, real quick, doing the TEDx at Hartford, Connecticut was really full circle. Part of my career was spent at the Hartford, the insurance company. So being able to come back and kind of step into my new shoes and my new career back though in that town where my HR career started was pretty neat. So right now I work full-time at Accenture. I think I have probably one of the best jobs in the world. So I do want to just recognize and let everyone know who's listening tonight that in the midst of this crisis, I do feel that I'm speaking from a sense of privilege. In a sense, I have been able to go, work remotely, inconvenienced very minorly, as our job as Accenture is really a technology company and management consulting company. So we've been operating under this future of work principles for quite a few years now, and really hope to spend the next however long we are in the midst of this crisis helping individuals, clients, communities, and really which Nick, one of the things I loved about you in this show is your tagline, this full potential. One of the things that brought me over to Accenture, which I do as a researcher, is study how do we unlock human potential? How do we elevate people alongside of technology in their roles? And so every day I get the opportunity to research, use empirical data to ultimately help our decision makers in business hopefully make better people decisions and really bring data to that conversation.
And can you, Kelly, just for my guests that don't know who Accenture is, a little bit about Accenture, you wanted to share a little bit about the company?
Yeah, we're one of the largest technology consulting companies in the world. We've got nearly 500,000 employees. And our mission is to really go out and help clients, communities, not-for-profits, government entities to bring the best of their technology and also the best of their people. So every day we're actually trying to unlock people's potential at work, whether that's a technology solution, a people solution. And so, yeah, we are really a management consulting technology company.
So I appreciate you sharing that. And I just kind of like, sharing a little bit about who you are now, what you do today, but I always like to take everyone on the journey of your career and figure out like, how on earth did you end up in this research role, talking about the future of work and how we do our jobs. So I'm going to guess that when you were a little kid, you didn't want to, be a researcher on the future of work. I'm going to guess that wasn't what you thought you were going to do when you grew up. So I'd love to kind of hear what was it you thought you were going to do when you grew up, when you were a little kid?
Yeah. Well, Nick, you can't laugh. What I thought I was going to do was I wanted to be a professional soccer player. So okay. I played soccer and started off my freshman year in college playing soccer, but quickly realized that was not going to be my career path.
I think a lot of kids have that dream and it comes crashing down. So I get it.
Yeah, but it was wonderful. It taught me teamwork. It taught me, how to be competitive, but hopefully in a collegial way. It taught me ethics, hard work, and practice. So I quickly realized, sitting in a freshman classroom, that I was not going to be a full-time soccer player. So needed to quickly reshift my priorities. And was sitting in a classroom, and a professor said, one of the best career paths that he thought in this life was to go be a professor. And, he said, but it's got a huge barrier of entry. You have to go get a Ph.D. in order to do that. And so, my 18, 19-year-old self thought, hey, that doesn't sound too bad. I can, keep doing this college life, and really wanted to be a professor, to be honest, from early on.
And that was freshman year of college. You figured that out.
Yeah. Once I realized the soccer dream wasn't going to happen.
Right. So what was the expectation? So you mentioned you went to college, and you went to undergrad and then got your master's, and then got your PhD. Was it always expected of you growing up that you would go to college? Or was that a conversation in your house with your parents, or was it just like, Kelly, you're going to college?
Yeah. I have to say, I think my parents gave, I'm the oldest of four kids, and I think they gave us a lot of autonomy in decision-making and in what we wanted to do with our careers and our lives. So I would say college was very much supported. I'm first generation college on my mom's side. So I think there was a lot of sense of pride and encouragement and push there. And my dad was actually coming from Rochester, New York. So I always joke that I'm a Kodak baby. My dad worked at Kodak and was fortunate enough to go to college himself. And so really helped guide me, I think, early on as I decided I was going to shift into business. He was also a business major. Actually, I should say that. I should back up. He was actually an engineer in engineering, but realized, with my skill set, business was probably the better path. And I would say it was highly encouraged and supported, but not mandatory.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I often, talk about that with guests, and your experience with your parents really shapes, what you end up doing after high school is what I found. So yes. I'm glad to hear that they were supportive. Yeah. So before we jump to your dream of being a professor, what was the first job that you actually got paid for when you were in high school? Like the first part-time job that you actually got a paycheck and had taxes taken out? I always ask this question because I'd love to hear the answer.
Yeah, this is probably going to be very surprising. So it's funny, when I was going to be turning 16 and wanted a car. And again, I was the oldest of four kids, so I think my parents were a bit motivated to get me a car, but needed income to pay for the gas and insurance. So there was a local Family Dollar going up in town, and they needed help, with people hanging up the shelves, stocking, really getting the store in operations. And so that was my very first paycheck, was actually from Family Dollar.
Hey, I worked in retail all through college, and those of us that work retail really appreciate, I think, any job you'll ever have, because retail is one of the hardest jobs you'll ever have.
I couldn't agree more.
So difficult.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so thankful for, my sister right now is actually still in retail, and so thankful for everyone who's still keeping the economy afloat during these days and still going to the stores and working. I know it's a huge sacrifice and it's a lot of work. So absolutely, I think the retail industry is one of those most understated and overlooked.
Yeah. And I always ask that question. I think you learn so much in that first job, and everyone remembers it, right? It doesn't matter how old you are or how many jobs you've had. You always remember the first job, right? And a lot of people remember their first boss too. But we'll leave that story for another day. So you decided your freshman year you wanted to become a professor. So is that why you went on the journey of going for your undergrad, then going for your master's, and then going to the PhD, or is there kind of like some other stops along the way?
Yeah, to be honest with you, once I had it set that, I'm going to be a professor, it sounded like a great lifestyle. I quickly realized about myself too, I really had a nagging question of why things worked. So I realized some of my friends were starting to go into more disciplines and really wanting to go deeper into a what or function. And I was just much more curious about, what makes people tick? Why is management so hard to get right in the workforce? Why is there such a disconnect between what I'm learning in the classroom, and then I go, and I had my first, what I would call my real job, back in my, right after college, and it just was so unfulfilling. And I just was like, there's a disconnect. What is going on? So I think even though that freshman class, I was fueled to want to be a professor, my real world experience is what ultimately led to the passion, the why for me, and helping fill this disconnect and this gap I think so many of us feel about our day jobs. And yet there's this wealth of academic knowledge and literature. And, my pipe dream, whether or not it's going to be fulfilled in my lifetime, is to help close the gap between what so many great academics have studied and know what makes work great, but how little in actual is in practice.
No, I think that's well said. So I think to spoil the end of the movie, you did not become a professor.
Not yet.
Not yet, right? Right.
Not yet.
But you absolutely you get an opportunity to do research in your current role, right? So I think when a lot of people think of professors, they think of, hey, you're teaching students in a classroom. But the other big part of being a professor is obviously the research piece, which you're getting to do every day. So your first, what would you consider your first real job then after college? Which one was that? I was looking at your LinkedIn. I was going to ask you that. My assumption, I don't know. You tell me which one it was.
So right after college, I'm graduating college right during the midst of the mortgage crisis, financial crisis, really hard to get a job. I was at the time actually very happy in my role. I was still in retail. I was actually at Best Buy in Geek Squad and, but wanted to put my degree to use and got a job. It was a really small boutique advertising company. It was called J Advertising, but it was part of the larger Interpublic group. So we were based in Rochester, New York, and had some pretty big clients. So at the time, it was Pontiac, GMC, Buick, and Tiger Woods was actually our spokesperson. So the world has come a long way since that first job.
And that was in the marketing space. So which is what you went to undergrad for. Yes.
And it's funny though, my career, the one thing that stayed pretty stable, even though, if you go on my LinkedIn, I started off in marketing. I was actually in media planning. So I was every day working in Excel. I was actually running a lot of statistics on consumer behavior and, realized quickly that, again, as I'm sitting in my office, running all this analytics on, consumer behavior and trying to figure out at the time to inform our media buyers, what's the right advertisement to watch? What billboard do we want to purchase? What's going to get the biggest motivation from our customers? I'm sitting around at my desk thinking, we got to be doing the same thing on our people here. How do we understand people at work and motivations and taking that same data analytics approach that marketers have been doing for decades?
So I think one interesting thing that we have in common is neither one of us started our careers in HR, right? You started in marketing. I actually started in IT, and then we both ended up moving to HR. So, and I get this question a lot: how on earth did you make the shift from a marketing role to an HR role? Like, what was the secret? How did you pull that off?
Yeah, so that was I'm very thankful. At the time, I was actually at the Hartford. So I moved from Rochester to Philadelphia, fast forward a couple years, and was actually finished with my master's and in the midst of completing my Ph.D. And I met actually with our head of HR at the time and said to her, here's what I'm actually learning in school. Here's my background. Here's what I think I'm, getting a skill set in and pretty good at. I know it's a leap to go from marketing to HR, but at the end of the day, there's so much as we think about consumer experiences and consumer data that translates so well into the HR space. And I went in with a bit of a pitch on how, I have some fresh thinking as a result of my time in marketing and combining that with my actual education program.
Right.
So I got a lady took a chance on me and was so thankful, and it was a huge awakening to realize what the HR space was actually all about. You go into that in a second, but I think it was having that business case of, again, I think one of the most important things as we think about our careers and what I continue to try to do today is how am I going to add value? With me being there, what's going to be different as a result of the department or the thinking, and ultimately, how am I going to make that person's, the head of the department or the boss, their job easier?
Right.
And so that was the pitch I went in.
It's interesting you say that, because I think when people think of HR, a lot of people think, they'll ask, oh, you're in HR. So do you recruit people? Do you do payroll, or do you fire people? Are usually like the three things you get asked, right? And I actually think that HR, it's interesting how it's, obviously I haven't been in it my whole career, but from talking with people that have been in it for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, it it is really, I think, shifted quite a bit to being
Yes.
one of the most strategic parts of the organization, because every company now realizes that you can't be successful without great talent, and HR is the one that are going to help attract the talent, retain the talent, and develop the talent. So it's
Absolutely.
interesting how I think the function has really shifted from payroll, firing, and those more transactional type activities that people think of, to how strategic it is today. So what did you do in your role at the Hartford in HR? What because you weren't doing the research and the future of work stuff you're doing today. It was more like a generalist role, right?
Yeah, so I was an HR business partner to actually our CFO. So, the Hartford has their core insurance business based in Hartford, Connecticut, but they also have a mutual fund business, which is based out of Radnor, PA. And so I was assigned to the mutual fund business and supporting our CFO. And it was interesting. This is where I think I actually got my hands-on real-world experience on what the future of work was going to start looking like, well before I even knew this is what I was going to go research. One of my very first tasks as an HR generalist and business partner was to fly every other week to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we had an office, back office, actually, operations. And we were installing RPA, robotic process automation, and really seeing firsthand, one, the disruption that was going to cause on the human workforce. And then also, though, the emergence of different roles and different activities and different business needs as a result of the technology. So it was a really trying, it was, HR, I think, carries really the emotional labor of an organization too, to your point. I mean, they are the ones who are having to make sure the people part work, and the people part's the messy part. And so I give kudos to all of my HR colleagues every day, especially during a time like a crisis. Because at the end of the day, this is a human labor crisis, and HR really is the ones, to your point, who has to be the strategic business partner, but also the calm, collective voice in the midst of this, and making sure that we're bringing compassion to everything that we're doing in business as well. So they carry a lot of hats.
So this was kind of the awakening for you, this role, and so how did you make? So my next question is, how did you make the shift from that role at the Hartford in more of like a just generalist HR business partner role to this role at Deloitte, where you were actually doing the future of work? So that was, you were actually doing research on the future of work, which is the topic we'll eventually get to after we go through your career.
Yeah, so it was really neat. The one thing I have to say, and I can't say enough positive about the Hartford, as I was getting my Ph.D. and doing my dissertation, they allowed me access to their workforce population and allowing me to do real world work research while on the job. So I was able to quickly take a job in HR and then also really have it be an extension of my research that I was doing while in the Ph.D. program, and really trying to understand, what is it, why are some people get up and come to work and, what we call in the OB space, organizational citizenship behaviors, but they're the ones going above and beyond each day. And other times, in HR, we call them our steady eddies. Why are sometimes you have people that come in and just, there for the paycheck, and then others who, may be engaged in some deviant behavior. So at that time, I was really already starting to research and apply HR at the same time for about 2 years, which I think really accelerated my own understanding of the future of work and to my empathy towards the workforce leaders and all of that. So when I completed my PhD program, Deloitte was actually actively recruiting. They were building up a research center focused on human issues. So you'll see in a lot of consulting companies, all of them have some sort of research hub,
right?
Like a little mini academia within these consulting companies that create thought leadership. And a lot of them have over-rotated on technology or economics or what we like to call the harder science of business. And all of a sudden, the people issues are emerging right after the 07-08 crisis, more and more. And I was recruited right after my PhD program and took the job at Deloitte.
And just to kind of tell us together, what was your dissertation on for your PhD?
Yeah, so it was all about personal responsibility. So, does personal responsibility, is that an individual difference personality type trait, or is that something that we can change within our culture and in our environment in order to have people feel as if they have more psychological ownership or more attachment to the organization? And within my research, I cannot generalize the findings because it was a pretty small sample size, but it ended up becoming much more around an individual difference and something we might want to consider hiring for, and even, selecting leaders based on that, as opposed to, trying to do all these different environmental factors, cultural things like ping pong tables and beer kegs in some companies to try to engage the workforce.
So then I think to kind of summarize, it was your work within your PhD program, the work at the Hartford, and it kind of culminated in your desire or your passion to move to this future of work type role at Deloitte.
Yes, absolutely. And they were actively recruiting, and it just seemed like a very good fit.
Everything just came together.
It did, because you know what? There's not that many PhDs who study people. And,
right.
And again, it was between Deloitte and actually going to become a full-time professor. But the one thing I realized is, if I'm going to go and teach one day, I better do it. I better have the experience. And right now, the business world in particular is at such a crossroads. I can't think of a better time to be a talent researcher, but also bear the responsibility of what that means. What I realized quickly on in my research is that studying people becomes self-fulfilling. So if we go tell people to go create open office spaces, guess what happens? That becomes the latest trend in management fad. And so when I realized that 90% of management theories that are published, in the Harvard Business Reviews and stuff like that end up being proven to be maybe not such a great idea a decade later, I wanted to add a voice to the conversation and make sure when we make decisions around people at work, that we're doing that with, evidence and doing it with a scientific approach. And anyways, that's my goal and passion of why I do what I do today.
So what does, for those listening, when we talk about the future of work, like how do you guys in that space define that? What does that mean?
That is the $1 million question, because all of a sudden, 4 to 5 years ago, when we started really coming up with this construct, the future of work, I don't think we realized it was going to become such a buzzword and headline. But really how I think about it as a researcher, and I think how Accenture thinks about it today, is we try to distill it into a simple message, is we know technology is accelerating at a pace much faster than individuals or even organizations can keep up with. So technology has always disrupted the workplace, but it's doing so in a much more disruptive way. It's accelerating much faster. So the question is, how do we redesign work so that we unlock people's potential alongside these technologies? So the future of work is all about redesigning jobs, really looking at that human element at work, knowing that technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotic process automation is coming, and it's not going to slow down. It's going to cause much disruption to all types of workers. And I think the one thing I would just say as we think about the future of work, it already hit the manufacturing industry, back in the 80s.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it was blue collar work, I don't think it got the attention that it deserved. And so again, today we're seeing that same disruption now, maybe amongst more white collar professions. And I think it's becoming much more visible as a construct.
No, I think that's well said. I mean, and we'll talk about that when we get into your research a little bit, but we've seen, we're as for those that don't follow, we're in the fourth industrial revolution. So we've seen things like this happen before, right? When we went from agricultural society to, the industrial society, that was a big shift, right? And then we had the whole internet shift. So we've had things that happen, to your point, before, but this seems to just be impacting almost every industry, which is, I think, the big difference. Whereas in the past, to your point, it was more around, manufacturing specifically, or previously agriculture, right? So what is, and then before we jump into the research, what does your typical day look like at Accenture as a lead talent researcher? Is every day a little bit different? Is a lot of it talking to people and doing interviews? Like what does it look like on a day-to-day basis?
So a lot of variety. This past week has been much more disruptive than usual, obviously, with everything that's going on. But a typical day is as a researcher, I do mixed methods research. So I do both qualitative interviews, whether that's with the workforce. A lot of times, I feel very privileged and blessed. We actually get to go and interview CEOs, CHROs, board of directors. So the people making the decisions every day at the top of a business. And then we do a lot of survey data. So we try to get into, how do people feel about work? What is their perceptions? What are they thinking? We get into some ethical research as well, looking at surveys. So it's both. It's a combination of looking at actual survey data. We also have that opportunity. I work with a lot of brilliant economists. Accenture Research has almost 400 researchers all with different expertise. So I get to work with a lot of economic data as well. And when you bring all that together, the qualitative storytelling, the interviews, what workers feel and how they think through survey data, and then the economic data, it really begins to paint a picture. Oftentimes of complexity, there's no simple answer here, but allows me to really have a lot of variety in my job every day on what I'm doing.
So I get a sense that you like data just from our conversations, but
I
what
do.
do you like better? Do you like going through survey data, or do you like the actual interviews with the actual people? Like what do you get more excited to work on?
So I would say when I'm working with actual data, I feel like it's trying to find a needle in a haystack, so it feels much more of a challenge, but I often don't have the full story, or it's a very sterile story.
Right.
When I'm able to actually go out and speak with workers or executives, the whole picture, it's kind of like a puzzle piece, every day I'm finding a different piece of the puzzle. So my natural bias tends to be a bit more towards, I was trained in quantitative research methods. But that can only go so far. And I think, as we'll get into the research too, storytelling is becoming so important, especially during times of crises. And really, people get turned off by all the data that's out there, and stats is not the right time to go out with that. So I'm more and more appreciating the art of storytelling and doing so with interviews. So I'm still always going to be a bit biased towards the quantitative data, but really starting to fall much more in love with qualitative research and stories, and really pulling more towards the heart of business as opposed to just the mind.
Yeah, I think the data is usually, the data is obviously important. I think if you have the right stories, it can back up the data and tell the story of the data, right? Which is, I think, how you marry it together. So I'm gonna do something fancy, and I'm gonna share my screen and share your research at the same time that we are live. So again, amazing technology here. I'll put this up here. So there we go. All right. So we've got the research up at the same time. So why don't you walk us through, Kelly? So, and again, we'll put this link for everyone in the show notes so people can go check this out later. But this is the research. Literally, you guys just published it Friday night, correct?
It's been out, less than 48 hours.
So, and the name of it, for those that are will be listening on the podcast, the name is Human Resilience: What Your People Need During COVID-19. So, like during the current crisis that we're in right now. So, again, I thank you for making the time during this insanely busy week to still come on and share this with everyone. But why don't we get into this? So, tell us a little bit about like what is the research you guys put together, and maybe some general points that you want to share with us.
Yeah. So the one thing I would say, again, as a researcher, I think this research applies to anyone and everyone. So a couple months ago, again, I came to Accenture wanting to understand, based on what Accenture is going after right now, how do we unlock human potential? What is it that makes workers tick? What is it that makes organizations work? What is it that makes work meaningful? And, and those, I know you were there at the TED Talk, how do we bring a sense of dignity back into what we do? And so we already had this research planned. We went out to about 16,000 global workers. And what we did is we tried to represent the general population. So it's a mix of people with no high school education, in the manufacturing industry or in high tech industry, retail, chemicals. It's across the board. We represent within this data set 15 industries and 10 geographies. And really what we were trying to get at too, what are those universal human needs, regardless if we're in crisis or not? What is it that we need from work? But then as we started researching, obviously most recently within the last 2 weeks, what we realized is our findings are just amplified during times of crisis. And so what we wanted to do is really just simplify as much as we can this very complex data set we went and collected. And taking Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which many people are familiar with, we found those same 3 basic needs. Maslow has 5 or 6, but we simplified them down into 3 right here, which is, during times of crisis, or really during any time, you have physical needs. You have to feel safe. You have to feel secure in your job. So this is going to include, the financial, being employable, and those within different who are not necessarily have the luxury of sitting in an office every day actually are in harm's way, making sure that you're physically safe. As part of this too, in our research, we wanted to make sure stress is becoming so amped up these days. And so what is it that minimizes that state of stress from a physical sense? as you move up the pyramid, we know then we have mental needs, emotional needs. We need to be well psychologically. And this is where that human resilience comes in. I think a lot of times, one of the things that we were talking about as a research team is what we're trying to essentially capture is the human spirit at work. So how well are you emotionally, mentally? And that's what we measured here. And then lastly, the third thing, and this is something probably where I spend most of my time as a researcher, and Brene Brown obviously famously said it best, is we're wired for connection. So as people, we have relational needs. And COVID-19 obviously puts a big strain on this as we all quarantine and isolated. So that sense of belonging, how can organizations, how can workers feel that sense of belonging and feel relationally well in the midst of this? So those are the three basic human needs that we distilled the research down to and wanted to understand what are the precise leadership actions that leaders can take today. You don't even have to be a leader. This is like a human to human connection here as well. Just as we go to work each day, how do we better meet each other's physical, mental, and relational needs as they're obviously amplified during this time of crisis?
Well, it's interesting. I think you bring up a good point, and it's interesting. I mentioned earlier when we were talking, like I don't usually take questions during these live shows, but I have all these people asking questions. So I'll leave some in that our guests are asking while we're talking. The physical, mental, and relational needs. This could be something that you need from your business. This could be something that you need from your parents if you're a kid. This could be something you need from your government, right? Your local government, or your state government, or your federal government. So I think it really is. It does kind of cut across all different industries and just parts of life. So when you guys went through this and you put this together, when you talk about specifically COVID-19 and what's going on right now, which part of this do you think all of it's currently affected by the current crisis, or do you think the relational needs is really what's kind of being amplified the most? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I hope we actually have some. That's a great question, Nick. I hope we have some research that we're planning on releasing over the next several weeks. To address this. I think it actually varies depending on the context you work in. So, one thing we've been really careful at Accenture as people researchers is making sure that context matters. So my current needs right now might be much more relational because again, I have the luxury of working from home. I work for a technology company. But
you're still employed. You're still getting paid. Exactly.
Yeah, my physical needs are being met. I'm sure right now my mental needs, that resilience is still going to be trying as the weeks go on and we continue to be quarantined and isolated. But for the most part, I'm going to be at the upper end of the pyramid as I think about myself. When I think about my colleagues and my friends who are having to go out into the medical communities, hospitals right now, who are going out into grocery stores to make sure the food supply and the supply chain is maintained. When I think about the workers who are still delivering packages, I think for that, the physical needs are so important that we make sure we get right as a community and as customers, as well as businesses. So I think it really depends where you are. And I think the one thing we wanted to lead with this research was empathy, that one side of the triangle isn't higher or better than another. But for those who are in physical harm or don't have that physical safety right now, we have to make sure as citizens and as human beings, we're helping each other maintain that sense of physical need as much as possible.
No, I think that's well said. And you and I we were talking earlier, we're kind of in the same situation where we're blessed enough where we're able to continue to work remotely, continue to get paid. And I think that's why, for those of us that do have that luxury, we give back, like what we're doing right now, right? So having you on to talk about this, right, and then sharing this with all these different organizations that might benefit from the things we're about to talk through, right? So,
yes, absolutely.
Or something as simple as I was talking about this with a friend earlier, going out and getting takeout from a local restaurant, or your favorite local restaurant, to make sure that you try to help keep the economy going. So, so I think that's a really good point. So why don't we jump into some of those? Because obviously we're not going to have time to go through all of your research.
Sure,
because there is a lot of it, but we'll link to it for everyone. One of the cool things that your team put together was 10 things the C-suite can do right now. We were talking that this really, you don't have to be a C-suite executive of a Fortune 500 company to benefit from this. Like you said earlier, you could be running a nonprofit, you could be running a startup, a small-sized business, a mid-sized business. This really, I think, this will resonate with a lot of different people. Yeah. So you want to hit on a couple of these things that you guys, identified that people leading can work on right now to kind of help with this situation?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I can give you maybe even a little bit more than what's on the paper there as researching this. There's two things that leaders and as individuals, we have to get right if we're going to meet every single one of those needs, physical, mental, as well as relational. Within the research, I tested over 20 different actual leadership behaviors we can do wanted to determine what's the one that's going to move the needle here the most. Two things emerged. The number one thing, and it's funny, I'm seeing some of this emerge, but not as much. I think, especially looking at social media feeds, is we have to treat each other with compassion and care right now. One of the things I read, in a research article that I think is so profound, and I'd love the audience to think about this, and as a researcher, I'm thinking about is, it's really obvious. So when you think about the law profession, there's the saying that goes, law is to justice, as medicine is to health, as business is to what? And so often your profits, or money. And I think during times like this, we've got to reframe that narrative. And, again, it doesn't, any organization doesn't necessarily have to be business, but really reconnecting. At the end of the day, business is in business to express care and compassion for people through whatever service or product they're offering. So we've got to get back to that original why. And so that's one of the things that we call businesses and leaders today. But then again, that transcends just leaders. That's all of us as humanity. And the second thing is, what people are looking for during this time is a sense of confidence in someone's capabilities to navigate this complexity. So do I trust, this all comes down to trust. Do I trust that you're going to lead me in a direction that's going to make me stronger or better or emerge from this crisis? Okay. And so if there's two things we can do today, it's all about compassion and concern for people. And secondarily, building up that confidence and capabilities to navigate this complexity. So those are the two things. That list of 10 that we came up with really then helps provide some action items. So a couple of the things that I love, hierarchy be damned. Right now, this is not the time to be leading with authority or hierarchy. It's a time to be doing a lot more listening. One of the best practices we found of organizations, regardless of size, small business, not government, large businesses, is being able to actually give decision-making rights to those closest to the chaos. So that's often your frontline staff. Those are often, your frontline workers. Making sure that those people have full decision autonomy is so important. This is not the time to be evoking hierarchy or power or ego during this time. Some of the other things we talk about is, again, this is hard for me as a researcher because I want to go back to the data, but this is not the time to be putting up PowerPoints and frequency numbers in data. This is really a time to be telling stories and really evoking the heart of what we're doing and who we are and how we're operating. So trying to minimize, the PowerPoint, the meetings, and really getting into the heart of that. And then the last thing I'll emphasize here that I thought was a really important practice that our leaders came up with was stop the non-essentials. There's so much in business. We've had the luxury of operating out of a decade of abundance that we've picked up a lot of activities that may be not necessary. And so really taking a hard look and understanding what's essential, what's not essential, and really being able to free up your people right now. They're balancing an enormous amount of work, home life. People have kids who, are out of classrooms and out of school. How do we free up some of that capacity that they have that they were giving to tasks that just are not essential during this time, and making a pretty hard line on what that looks like? So, those are some examples from the research. Obviously, there's a lot more there, but just a few that I'd highlight in this conversation today. And
again, I think those will resonate with no matter what size business you're in, or if you're in like you mentioned, a local, a state, or a federal government agency. I think a lot of this is really going to resonate with everything that's going on right now.
Yes.
So a couple. So again, thank you, and we'll, for those of you that are watching or listening, check out our show description afterwards, and we'll make sure we link to this specific this specific research page, so you can check out a lot more about what Kelly's specifically talking about, because there is a lot more than we have to share on our show tonight. But I think that was a great preview. So what when you talk about the future of work, right? Because obviously you mentioned, and it's funny, I was thinking you almost need a dictionary when you rattled off for people, well, RPA and machine learning and AI and all these different like technologies and trends that we're seeing around the future of work. How do you think this specific crisis of COVID-19 is going to either accelerate some of these trends or change the way we work? Because I'll use a perfect example. So and I think a lot of people know I work for Cigna, the global health services company, and we've embraced remote work for I can't tell you how long. Like we have a lot of people that work at home full time or part time. But you and I probably both have friends that work for a company that are like, nope, you can't work at home. We don't offer that. All of a sudden, that has been thrown out the window, and every company is letting people work from home. So I think that's an example of how this might be adjusting the future of work. But I want to kind of hear from you, the expert, what are other things that you're thinking of how this is going to change the future of work?
Yeah, so I think two trends I would point out right now as I think about the future of work that I think are going to be dramatically accelerated because of this current crisis. One that you just mentioned is the integration of technology and the mobility that we have to do our job. So that's going to cause a downstream impact with a lot of work redesign, policies. A lot of organizations today are not set up to become a fully digital company. Or allow, take place of the technology that is available for workers to have a lot more autonomy, to be remote, to be flexible. So I think that's going to cause a pretty big impact, especially for HR, who I think are going to be at the forefront of leading that work redesign. The second thing that I think was already beginning to emerge that I think is going to be amplified during this time is businesses, over 180 CEOs recently signed what was a business roundtable saying that the purpose of business must be much more about stakeholders than the shareholders. I think during this crisis, that is going to continue to come to the forefront. How can organizational leaders, when we look at the various trust index that are out there, businesses are actually emerging at the very top of that list of where citizens are looking to for support and guidance. And so I think businesses are at this crossroad and have a really big opportunity to step into the stakeholder approach of meeting local communities, of better servicing their customers, their supply chain, their employees. And this is a time that I think we're going to see that accelerated based on the crisis. So I'm really hopeful. I actually have a lot of hope today that we're going to see the business community step up in profound ways. And as a result of that, I think customers and the workforce is going to continue to demand more of businesses and look to see them take on a much more elevated role in society. So I think the combination of the workforce being untethered from that, 9 to 5 butts and seats is really going to be a very old-fashioned notion very shortly. And the role that businesses play in broader society, I think, is going to continue to come to the forefront.
Yeah. And I think the second thing you mentioned, where businesses are doing more than just, focusing on shareholders and profits. I think just in the past week, you saw how many private entities stepped up to say, hey, federal government, we will help with this, or we will help with this, or we will help with this, because they know, to your point, it's good for the country, it's good for their business, it's just good for humanity. So I think we've seen a lot of examples of that. I think we'll continue to see them. So I agree with you completely. Yeah. So why don't we do we'll do a rapid fire session to close this out. So I'll ask you a couple questions, and we'll just have you give short, quick answers and see what you think. So, favorite class in college, and you went to you got 3 different degrees. So I don't know how you're going to sort through all of them, but what was your favorite class?
My favorite, my favorite class in college was my undergrad ethics in business.
Okay. All the way back. You're going back to undergrad. Okay.
It was the time, right after Enron and, all these decisions is when I realized, like, oh my God, this is very complex. There is no right or wrong.
All right. Biggest accomplishment of your career so far?
Nick, I have to say, I think so far as the TEDx talk, that was a pretty big personal and professional accomplishment. And Accenture was so supportive and really been thrilled with some of the outcomes of that. So it was the TEDx for me right now. Which
you did, it was very well done. So kudos to you on that. I dream one day to be on a TEDx stage. So we'll see how that goes.
Great.
We'll see. How about biggest failure of your career so far? Because I always ask that question. People are like, why are you going to bring that up? Because I think you learn so much from those failures. So that's why I always ask that.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually probably have more than enough in that Rolodex. But biggest failure actually was when I was in my HR job. I was the lead HR person on having to shut down an office. And so there's about 300 people that we had to either reassign or unfortunately lay off that day. And I had miscalculated the severance package. I was under so much emotional stress and really just, it was a really difficult situation, probably the worst day of my career. and making a financial error that impacted so many people. Obviously, we were able to course correct and everyone was paid right and all of that. But I think for me, I learned, the emotional labor, the empathy of HR professionals who are under a tremendous amount of stress and having to be responsible for the table stakes of work is really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what a lot of people don't realize is, or maybe they do, but it's, we take the job, us in HR take it very seriously because we affect so many people's lives so immensely that it really is a challenge at times for us. So
yes, absolutely.
So again, thank you so much for making time. This is a fantastic conversation. I always close with the same question I ask every guest. What is your one piece of advice for my listeners that has helped you reach your full potential so far in your career that you would want to share with everyone?
Yeah, I would say as much as possible. And again, I'm going to come from a bit of a bias being in business, but a lot of times, business is wired for competition and self-interest. And my biggest advice, if we're going to unlock full potential, is to ensure that every day I'm making those around me better. And so I think that's the right mindset as we think through the future of work. One of the other things I say is, social capital, our ability to work together is going to become so much more important. So as much as we can, check the ego at the door and really get up each day figuring out how can we make others around us better. And I think that actually leads to such better business results and your own individual success as a result of that. But it's the collaborative over the individual is my advice.
And in times of crisis, it's even more important.
That is my biggest advice. Don't hoard.
Yeah,
This is the time to heal.
This is a time to help. Assume positive intent and lend that hand to help. So thank you, Kelly. I appreciate you making the time. A great conversation. And we'll make sure we share your LinkedIn profile with everyone and the research to the Accenture link. And hopefully this helps some people that are working right now with their small business, nonprofit, whatever, and give some tips for them to get through this. So thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Nick. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.